So we've talked a lot about the fact that there's this convergence of events that we see happening. All these different things, the Middle East, Israel, things that are going to happen during the tribulation period, the foundations for all of those are being laid. Growing apostasy in the church. Of course, it all started, I think, with the rebirth of Israel in 1948 and taking back the city of Jerusalem in 1967. We've also talked about, and there's a presentation on our YouTube channel about the acceleration of Bible prophecy, so that what I said down in Florida, I think bears true, that if there's, at the time of Jesus' first coming, what was going on at the time of Jesus' first coming will be what's going on at the time of his second coming. What we saw at the time of his first coming was a lot of Bible prophecy being fulfilled in a very compressed period of time. From the announcement of John the Baptist's birth, that ended the 400 years of silence where God had not spoken to any of the prophets in Israel. Didn't mean that God was not active. Of course, we had the example of the Maccabees, which Daniel had prophesied, and the things that went on in Israel about 167 AD. But in that period of time, from the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ, which we celebrate over the next week, there was all those Bible prophecies about the first coming of the Messiah were fulfilled. And over half of them, about 60% of them, were fulfilled in the last week between Palm Sunday, his entry into Jerusalem, what we call Palm Sunday, and his resurrection. If what happened at the time of Jesus' first coming is what happens at the time of his second coming, then we can expect that there will be a period of time during which there really there's not much happening in terms of Bible prophecy being fulfilled, but there will be a trigger event. I think it's the rebirth of the nation of Israel and the retaking of the city of Jerusalem in 1967 that leads us into that period where Bible prophecy will occur in very rapid fashion. And we will eventually get to a point where things will happen so fast that it'll be impossible to keep up. And that's assuming that we're still here. And I think we're on the verge of that happening. So in this period of time, right before Jesus, this last week, the 70th week of Daniel, things will happen very rapidly. And as I said, I think we're seeing that happen now. Remember this, that in Titus chapter 2 it says, looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Christ Jesus. And so that the belief in the second coming is an important aspect of a believer's sanctification. That gives you motivation to live that holy life and to become like Christ that you are supposed to, because you should realize and always have at the front of the mind that in any instant, whether it's by death, the rapture, you will be standing in front of Jesus. And you want to do that with confidence and not with shame. Some things that are going on, we'll look a little bit at just some general things. Economics, apostasy in the church, and then Middle East. No, we're not going to get into anything other than that this week, because if Obama would just stay home, play more golf, I would have more time to cover some other things. Or we could go to 4-hour classes. This, Genesis chapter 11, Babylon. There are patterns in Bible prophecy. One of the patterns will be the Tower of Babel. The first rebellion against God will be similar to the last rebellion against God. We've talked about transhumanism in here. You've had really some of the leading experts in the world on that speak here over the past few years. Martine Erdman, Patrick Wood. In Babylon, at the time in Genesis chapter 11, God went down to destroy the tower that they were building. The Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language, and this is what they began to do, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. One headline, it was just in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal on Friday, science fiction comes alive as researchers grow organs in lab. There's been tremendous increases in the ability of medical technology to do things. And things are happening much more rapidly with the advent of technology and computers. And knowledge is increasing rapidly. And so we stand at this time, but the problem is, I'm not real confident that people have the ethics in place or the moral foundations to be engaged in this type of activity. And we don't know what, this is what we hear in public. I don't know what is going on behind laboratory doors, but I think we're getting into the realm of some fairly scary things. Economics is a headline this morning or yesterday in the London Telegraph that Britain is on the brink of running out of gas, natural gas. They had a pretty cold winter, so they've used about 20% more gas than normal. They've been shipping gas from North Sea, where they have plenty of it, to Asia, to the east, because the prices there are pretty high. So to make more money, they're shipping the gas, with the result that, as of Friday, Britain had 2 days of supply and storage. So I'm often amazed, having represented railroads and all these things, and I think I've mentioned here before, when I was a kid growing up, you would see a few fresh vegetables in the winter in the aisle at Fisher Foods on Cleveland Avenue in Canton, Ohio. Now you go to these stores in the middle of the winter and it's just this massive piles of fresh fruit and everything, because we have a good transportation system, but any cogs in that or any glitches in that can cause a big problem. That's what's happening in Britain. Japan is rolling the dice on the new era of easy money. Not good news. Japan is where we're headed. As I've said, Japan is a country that's dying demographically. They will lose approximately half of their population in the next generation because people are not having children. People are delaying marriage. And they now sell more, I've told, I don't know if this is an urban legend, but I've said it enough that it must be true now, that they're selling more adult diapers in Japan than children diapers. It's an aging population. They need more money. They're borrowing. They're printing. They have the ability to do that a little bit. They're the third largest economy in the world, but that economy has been stagnant, moribund, with falling real estate prices, declining wages since 1991. When they went into their economic decline. They're still the third largest economy, but they've had very little growth. And eventually that's going to catch up with them. They have total national debt that exceeds 200% of their gross domestic product. I believe that their debt now totals over 1 quadrillion yen. That's a big number, even if the yen's not worth $1. This is, I think, potentially a game-changing event. What's been happening in Cyprus the past few days, week. I mentioned this a little bit last Sunday, what they've done. Cyprus needed $10 billion to stay afloat, to keep its banks going. The banking industry in Cyprus is its largest industry. They've been a haven for money laundering, money from some not so good people in Russia, Russian oligarchs and Russian leaders that are taking money that maybe doesn't belong to them. One of the waypoints to get their money out is Cyprus. So when the country went into crisis and needed just $10 billion, they started looking at savings accounts. So what they decided to do was that they essentially treated everybody as a criminal, and they decided to take about 7% of small accounts and about 10% of large accounts. Now they've backed off of that. There have been runs on ATMs. I hear every ATM in the country is out of cash. I don't think the banks have reopened yet. I think that's been put off until Tuesday. There are meetings this weekend with the European Union. The Germans are insisting that they enact this tax, essentially steal money from people's bank accounts. So we see this chart here, which are total deposits, bank deposits in these various countries in the EU. And the question will be, what will Cyprus's look like at the end of the week? I mean, do you think really, I mean, do they think people are stupid? That they're going to leave their money in the banks to have the banks just willy-nilly take it? Now, if you think this has not been proposed for here in the United States, you're very naive. This is exactly what they're thinking about. Here, they've been looking at retirement accounts, and their rationale will be, and you might as well, I've already heard this argued by Democratic legislatures mainly that want to do this. Look, you haven't been taxed on that yet, so we're just going to tax you now and take the money right now because we have a big hump to get over. So we'll see what that chart looks like. Yes, sir.
100 represents euros, or?
I think that's 100. Well, yeah, it would be, I think, in the billions of euros, I would think. I think that would be right. The billion, that would be, the numbers on the left would be billions of euros. Here's a chart that shows a little bit. Now, everybody says the American Banking Association came out and said, look, even if it happens here, don't worry, your deposits are insured. Okay? Right now in the United States, there's $9 trillion at 9,000 billion, or $9 trillion in deposits. Anybody care to guess what the amount of FDIC has in terms of cash? Zero? No, it's more than zero. 10% would be 900 billion. That would be 25 billion. So 9,000 billion versus 25 billion. Those numbers don't work out. By the way, do you know what the exposure of our banks are to things in the derivative markets worldwide? This is $300 trillion, $9 trillion in the bank, exposure of $300 trillion, and actually I've heard that number might be 5 times that size. But I think whoever made this chart up chose 300 trillion because you would never be able to see the line for 25 billion down at the bottom. It would be too small. Here's an interview on a program called, now the interesting thing is, I watched a lot of videos this week about the economic crisis. When Alex Jones, I'm sure some of you know him, InfoWars and Prison Planet, and he's kind of crazy, but when he's starting to sound rational, then you know that we're in a major crisis. So, but this is a thing, Russia Today, this is, I think his name is Nigel Farage. He's a member of the European Parliament from England, and I believe that his purpose in life, you can see that his view will be very much a minority view among the European Union with what he has to say about the Cypriot crisis. And he is, I think his purpose in life is to bring other members of the European Parliament to the point where their heads want to explode. Because he's a thorn in their flesh, let's put it that way. So here's Mr. MEP Farage.
So then, the Cypriot Parliament is now due to vote on the proposed cuts on Wednesday at about 1600 GMT. But for now, let's get some perspective, shall we, on the levy with the United Kingdom Independence Party MEP Nigel Farage. Mr. Farage, evening to you. Every bailout, of course, comes with strings attached. It's never easy. But can Cyprus afford the price the EU set here?
Well, I mean, what's really happening here is we have an irreconcilable split between the north and the south of Europe. And in the north of Europe, and particularly I'm thinking about Germany, the Netherlands and Finland, there are very strong political voices saying we do not want to go on bailing out southern European countries. And bear in mind that Cyprus is now the 5th country out of 17 that's needed to be bailed out. And that is why the Germans extracted the terms that they did. But I must say, even in my direst predictions in this Parliament over the years about the way the EU bosses were behaving, never did I think that they would, in a completely unprecedented manner, resort to stealing money from people's bank accounts.
Well, it's because the EU can't afford
to.
It can't afford Cyprus to fail, can it? Look at the jitters that have already happened over what's gone on in the last couple of days.
Well, it can't afford Cyprus to fail, it can't afford Greece to fail, Portugal, Spain or Ireland. They know that once one country goes, the whole deck of cards will come tumbling down, and countries like Germany will realise absolutely vast losses, possibly as much as €1 trillion. So they are prepared now to do anything, literally anything, to try to keep the euro afloat, and that is why they've now resorted, as I say, to what can only be described as theft. And now they've done it in one country. They're quite capable of doing it in Italy, Spain, Portugal or anywhere else. And the message that sends to people who've got savings in banks in those countries, certainly if I was them, is get your money out while you can.
But I guess there's also a duty to look after the many expats that are there. In 2010, almost twice as much British money went to Cyprus as transfers from Russia, according to the country's official website. Surely you've got a responsibility to safeguard your constituents' interests there now?
Well, I mean, what the British government have said is that they will stand surety for the British Army soldiers and Air Force people.
But what about all the
there.
expats who have been living there 20, 30
people.
years?
The government have had nothing to say on that subject whatsoever. And what the government ought to do is to help the British people living down there, mostly pensioners, but what the British government needs to do is to say to the hundreds of thousands of Brits that are living in southern Spain, for goodness sake, get your money out of that country and have a monthly transfer to pay your bills. And that is what I'd like to see the Chancellor George Osborne do in his budget statement tomorrow in the House of Commons.
What sort of message is this sending to foreign investors? I mean, essentially, they're being taxed to cure a crisis that they had no part in causing, aren't they?
Yeah. Don't invest in the Eurozone. Do not invest anywhere in the Eurozone. You've got to be mad to do so because it's now run by people who don't respect democracy, who don't respect the rule of law, who don't respect the basic principles upon which Western civilization is supposed to be based. They are propping up a Eurozone which in the end is going to collapse in disastrous failure, and they are prepared to do anything to do so. I think that this decision, this German-dominated and led decision, is the worst decision we've seen so far in this whole Eurozone crisis.
And focusing back in on Cyprus, then it's completely dependent on its banking industry to survive. If it's forced to accept these taxes, it's going to leave its reputation in tatters and its livelihood in tatters, isn't it?
Yes, and I think that if I were a member of the Parliament in Nicosia, with a vote coming up, it looks like tomorrow now, as funny, isn't it? The vote keeps being delayed and the banks keep being closed for a further day. I think I'd vote against this package. I think, frankly, better to default to the bondholders and keep my most important industry going rather than accept these bullying terms from Brussels.
What about the future for these tax havens, Cyprus being one? A lot of various EU leaders have recently said they aren't happy with the way tax havens work. Do you think we'll see some change soon now?
Well, I mean, the EU have been unhappy about so-called tax havens for a very long time, ironically, whilst continuing to turn a blind eye to many activities that go on in Luxembourg. I mean, look, Cyprus finds itself right now in a very difficult, desperate position, but I would say better to officially go bankrupt, to default on international bond obligations, and to do their best to keep a banking industry and to keep some confidence in that country.
Nigel Farage, MEP for the United Kingdom Independence Party, thank you for your time tonight.
Okay. Well, I think you said it very well, and you just need to be watching the news because I don't think these issues are going away. They'll be able to kick the can down the road for a while, but eventually something will happen. There will be, I was talking to somebody the other day. What was the trigger for World War I? The assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo of the not then Yugoslavia, but I don't think a lot of people saw that as a particularly significant event when it happened, and it triggered World War I. And so, is this the trigger for a global economic crisis? Perhaps. I mean, this has. It's like a virus. If the lack of confidence in the banking system spreads to other countries, we won't have $9 trillion in bank deposits. We'll have a lot less, and then all the banks will be out of compliance, and the Fed, I often laugh at people like Paul Krugman who say, well, just print more money. You know, but I'm like, well, if $1 trillion would help, why just not print 10 trillion or 50 trillion if it doesn't have any consequences? Oh, well, they did that in Zimbabwe. They printed too much. But, well, the precedent is there. Just real quick on this, the Pope, the new Pope, I do think this is significant. He's the first Jesuit. Brandon House at Worldview Weekend has done some excellent work on the Jesuits and their background, where they come from, what they stand for. They were essentially established as sort of a military wing of the Vatican to kill Christians who had bought into the Reformation. They were established about 1534 to 1540 by Ignatius Loyola in Spain, with the approval of, I think the Pope finally approved it about 1540. John MacArthur gave a great, I haven't seen it online yet, but I've heard clips of it from somebody that recorded it off the air. He gave a message last Sunday night at his church in California about the Pope. Listen to what the Pope said in his homily when he, by the way, this is the Pope praying at the shrine to Mary, St. Mary Major in Rome. It used to be a pagan temple, was converted to a church, and the goddess Diana or Athena was changed to the Virgin Mary. It's from the standpoint of what the Bible says about Jesus and Mary, it is a temple of idolatry and very troubling. And so when I hear evangelical leaders saying, oh, this is going to be a great evangelistic pope, well, not for Christianity. It might be for Catholicism, but not Christianity. It's a different religion. This is what he said in his homily. Let us never forget that our authentic power is service, and that the Pope, too, when exercising power, must enter ever more fully into that service which has its radiant culmination on the cross. He must be inspired by the lowly, concrete, and faithful service which marks St. Joseph, that would be the father of Jesus. And like him, he must open his arms to protect all of God's people and embrace with tender affection the whole of humanity, especially the poorest, the weakest, the least important, those whom Matthew lists in the final judgment on love, the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, and those in prison. Only those who serve with love are able to protect. Now listen, this is yet another, sometime we maybe should do a series, Mike, on most misinterpreted Bible passages. You know, judge not that you be not judged. This would be one. I could probably think of a half a dozen others. That is not what Matthew chapter 25 talks about. It's what it says, but that's not how it should be applied. And but I would not. I have low expectations for the Pope to get the interpretation of that passage right. The problem is that this is the way that I would say probably the majority of evangelicalism interprets that passage today. Taken completely out of context, and people like N.T. Wright, while he may say he's not, are taking this passage and essentially turning salvation not by justification through faith, but to justification by works. And that this will be the final judgment. The only way they get around it is that everybody makes it to heaven. Tomorrow you should pray for this. I think it's tomorrow or Tuesday. There will be oral arguments on the DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act case, and the Proposition 8 case from California. Article in the Los Angeles Times this morning about Ted Olson, a right-wing icon, who has come out in support of gay marriage. Of course, we have our own senator who merely changed because his son came out as gay, which means that it really wasn't a moral thing or a religious thing that he held. It was just something, a belief of convenience to get elected. And I question the moral compass of people who change that easily. If it's a moral principle, it's a moral principle for everyone. regardless of your personal circumstances. Back in 2011, Rob Bell, former pastor at Mars Hill Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, was identified by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Talked a little bit about Bell's new book last week, What We Talk About When We Talk About God. He also has a book that came out last week as well, Love Wins for Teens. If God threw a party, would everyone be invited? Would you? So it's clear that he's not going, while he resigned from the church, he's not gone away. I want to play you a few clips of Rob Bell. Listen to what this man says. Now, this man has been very popular throughout evangelical churches. Very popular. To this day, I know people that identify him as one of their favorites on their Facebook page. I do not like to use the H word, heretic, very often, but Rob Bell is a heretic. And it is very troubling. And with what he said this week, there should be no question in anybody's mind. He's not, as one Christian leader suggested to me, well, he's just provocative. He's a heretic. I mean, all heretics then, I guess, are provocative because they deny the gospel. But this has been a trajectory that he's been on, and people that have watched him have been warning about this for 10 years, ever since he started his church. And now, finally, other people are getting the idea. But then the question is, what are they going to do to go back and undo the damage? So first, an interview with Rob Bell on MSNBC. I played maybe part of this last week, but I had some bandwidth issues, so I'm going to play it again in full.
Yeah, well, think about your own life and how you grow and change and become a better person. Is it because somebody scared the hell out of you, or shamed you, or condemned you, or is it because somebody gave you a vision of a better way to live?
And believed in you.
And it created in you a desire. A friend of mine talked about a desire, a hunger for something you previously didn't know you were hungry for.
Right.
So who here wouldn't love more insight on how to have less worry, or to be more forgiving, or to be more generous? I mean, that's, to me, at the heart of faith is a vision of a better kind of life.
It's
and
a
you're
hard
drawn
message,
into
though,
it.
for
You're
some
pulled.
people, though. I mean, you actually, there were some people that didn't appreciate your message, and love wins.
There are people who haven't appreciated my message from way back.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, if you go all the way back, I come from the Christian tradition. I mean, Jesus is put on the cross by very religious people who are threatened because an entire system he is calling into question. So this is actually nothing new.
Do you believe in heaven and a hell and an afterlife?
I do. And I begin with a belief that right now the choices we make have serious implications. I mean, we're creating hells on earth right now. 800 million people don't have access to clean drinking water. I mean, we have, across the spectrum as humans, I begin with Jesus' call that how you live now creates a certain sort of heaven on earth right here. I don't even have to look past death for that sort of thing.
By the way, in hell, if what Jesus said in Luke about the rich man and Lazarus is true, which I think was actually a true story, not a parable, they don't have access to drinking water in hell. So, last week, Bell went to Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. It's a very liberal, it calls itself a church. I'm not sure I would use that term. By the way, this is one of the centers in the world, one of the leading centers in the world for using a labyrinth in worship. Okay, the Grace Cathedral Labyrinth. It was the model, for example, for the labyrinth that they put in the courtyard at the Long Beach Grace Brethren Church a number of years ago. So it's not biblical. But Rob Bell was interviewed by the pastor, and here's some things he had to say about evangelical Christianity at that thing.
What do you think the future of the evangelical church is? I mean, by which I mean a particular kind of evangelical church, because you and I might call ourselves and each other evangelical, but I think I mean the evangelical churches with a capital E. What do you think their future is in this country? Or in general?
Well, I think that your
I think we are witnessing the death of a particular subculture that doesn't work.
Yes.
I think there is a very narrow, politically intertwined, culturally ghettoized evangelical subculture that was told we're going to change the thing, and they haven't. And they actually have turned away lots of people. And I think when you are in part of a subculture that is dying, you make a lot more noise.
Right.
Because that pain, it's very painful. So you sort of die or you adapt. And if you adapt, it means you have to come face to face with some of the ways we've talked about God don't actually shape people into more loving, compassionate people. And we have supported policies and ways of viewing the world that are actually destructive. And we've done it in the name of God, and we need to repent.
Right.
That's just what I think.
Yeah.
So I think in some senses you are witnessing, that's what you are witnessing. You would not believe the people, the Love Wins book, who will say, hey, I'm the leader of such and such evangelical Christian organization, and I love the book, but I cannot publicly mention your name or I'll lose my job. So that's when you know something's falling apart, is when people actually believe something, but they cling to their paycheck.
Yeah, that would be identifying a hireling. Someone who doesn't care about the truth of Scripture, but cares more about their paycheck and keeping that paycheck coming in. So they don't really tell people what they really believe. And the statements that he had to make about this is what you call a straw man argument. You create a monster on the other side so that you can argue against that monster, even though that monster does not exist. This man is either he's had all the intelligence trained out of him by Fuller Seminary and other places that he went. I think he was undergraduate at Wheaton, or he's intentionally ignorant, or he's just a liar. Those are the choices because he is so wrong on this that it's not even possible. It really makes me, I think, righteously angry to hear him say these things. I've heard him say, and I think I've played in here a clip of him, who said that people that teach about heaven and hell and that if you get saved you go to heaven when you die are responsible for the massacre in Rwanda. I could play you the clip. This is what this man said in his pulpit at Mars Hill. And yet evangelical leaders who believe in the rapture support him. It just shows to me the very serious deterioration in evangelical thought. Of course, in keeping with that tomorrow is a very important oral argument in the Supreme Court, of course, being San Francisco, you might expect that Rob Bell would be asked a question about, what do you think about gay marriage? And finally, Rob Bell answered the question with clarity, and here is that response.
Let me bring you to a particular issue that is, of course, one of the hot issues of the day, which is a question from someone in the audience. The public position of support among prominent conservatives for same-sex marriage equality, has moved rapidly in the past year. Can you say where you are on this issue?
Yes, I am for marriage. I am for fidelity. I am for love, whether it's a man and a woman, a woman, a woman, a man and a man.
Okay.
And I think the ship has sailed, and I think that the church needs to just, this is the world that we are living in, and we need to affirm people wherever they are.
Great. Good.
Okay, did anybody not understand where he stood? This has been, listen, I said this years ago, this is where this guy was going to end up. And I'm not trying to make myself out to be a prophet. I just happened to pay attention to what he was saying and what he didn't believe, which was everything fundamental to Christianity. And I mean everything. Here's a TV interview that he gave. If you think, well, maybe he misspoke on that occasion, this was followed up with an interview this week.
What we're seeing right now in this day, I believe God pulling us ahead into greater and greater affirmation and acceptance of our gay brothers and sisters and pastors and friends and neighbors and coworkers. And we're realizing that God made some of us one way and some of us another. And it can be a beautiful thing. And so instead of throwing stones and causing more pain and suffering in the world by excluding some and writing off others and speaking incredibly unkindly about some, we embrace that we're all on a journey, and all of us together, whatever our particular perspective is, let's work together on the real problems we have ahead of us. A lot of people, when they say by God ahead, do you mean like same-sex marriage? And yes. And we live in a world where we have friends, neighbors, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, people we've journeyed with for years who are gay. And we need to love, affirm, and all of us together work on the real problems we have in the world. And I think that's one of the things you're seeing right now, is you are seeing God pulling us all forward into a greater realization that we need more love. We need more fidelity. We need more monogamy. We need more people who are committed to each other. It's not good for us to be alone. So this is a huge moment when I think lots of us are realizing the old way of seeing things doesn't work. It causes so much pain and heartache, and God's inviting us to see things in new ways. And we need to say yes, and then we need to step into the future together. Probably every generation had this sense of, man, we're living in the midst of history. What's interesting about this, and if you look through history, generally great new technological breakthroughs caused a ripple effect across culture. So technology seems to spur all sorts of social, economic, cultural, and religious effects. And I think what has happened with the internet, and lots of people are saying this, is simply you cannot live in your own tribal bubble anymore. You cannot stay cocooned off from how the world actually is. And what happens when you are all suddenly exposed to thousands of different viewpoints is it can call your own into question, and it can have this refining fire sort of dimension to it when you realize, wow, I've been living with a bunch of views and perspectives that don't actually work and don't actually bring life. So I need to be honest about that. And that can be painful, but it's also liberating, and it's where the life is.
Does gay marriage bring life?
No.
Okay. I thought I had paid attention in biology. This is the Green Street Church in North Carolina, or South Carolina. It's a United Methodist congregation where the kingdom of God is breaking through. As a typical kingdom view among people like Rob Bell, the kingdom is already not yet. It's not a biblical viewpoint. We don't have time to go into that. That's probably another teaching topic we can go into. But this is what they said on their website, United Methodist Congregation. On the subject of same-sex marriage, Green Street UMC sees injustice in the legal position of state government and the theological position of our denomination. North Carolina prohibits same-sex marriage and all the rights and privileges marriage brings. The Leadership Council has asked that their ministers join others who refuse to sign any state marriage licenses until this right is granted to same-sex couples. So they've banned marriage in that church. Because the United Methodist Church prohibits its pastors from conducting same-sex weddings, excluding gay and lesbian couples from the Holy Sacrament of Marriage, the Leadership Council has asked the pastor to refrain from conducting wedding ceremonies in our sanctuary for straight couples until the denomination lifts its ban for same-sex couples. Carl Truman, who I believe is Lutheran, pretty solid guy on most issues, says, well, we really shouldn't be too surprised. We have this tendency to think of gay marriage, and to a lot of us it has kind of a yuck factor to it, like, ew. But he said that's not really where it started. The evangelical church lost a long time ago.
And the previous screen said the Leadership Council, that's just for that particular church?
For that church.
Okay.
That would be like their board of elders.
Yes,
okay. Carl Truman writing this week, only now with the yuck factor vanishing for many, it is becoming clear that the logic of gay marriage was set years ago and was generally accepted by the church in practice, if not always in theory. In the wider world, the transformation of marriage into an inward-directed bond focused on personal satisfaction, sexual, emotional, financial, was the key move, ably assisted by the separation of sexual activity from the deeper soil of marriage. a message preached by just about every sitcom and soap opera made in the last 25 years. Sex ceased to be the crowning seal in the marriage covenant and became something recreational in and of itself. Even for many Christians, the purpose of marriage, the establishment of no-fault divorce, was the legal recognition of this and redefined marriage in far more fundamental way than any future applications or revisions of the law are likely to do so. And when Pat Robertson told people that they could divorce their incapacitated and senile spouses, he was operating with a fundamentally redefined notion of marriage as unbiblical, if not blasphemous, as anything you will ever hear. The church accepted by and large, I don't think he's going to be on the 700 Club, by the way. The church accepted by and large the logic of no-fault divorce. At least nobody just seemed to think that it was quite the apocalyptic moment presented by gay marriage. Why? My guess is that there was simply no real yuck factor involved. And if two people had fallen out of love, whatever that means, wanted to go back and start all over again, that seemed not yucky, but an aesthetically pleasing outcome in a world ruled by sentiment and truncated notions of personal satisfaction. The yuck factor, or lack of it, serves to cloud our thinking on too many issues. The argument for gay marriage proceeds on the basis of a logic which society, and sadly many churches, accepted long ago. Do not fret about when marriage will be redefined. It was quite some time back. I think that's a very perceptive thing. The Bible warns us at this time in 2 Timothy chapter 4, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth, and will turn aside to myths. And that's what Rob Bell teaches, by the way. If you've ever listened to him unpack history, he believes in a lot of different myths. But you, be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. Prophetic advice and sound advice, biblical advice all at the same time. Well, let's look at the Middle East, if I haven't depressed you enough already. Lebanon. Interesting time in the Middle East. The Lebanese, by the way, the Lebanese government is Mataki, the prime minister, resigned this weekend, and now they're going to have to elect another government. They have Syrian rebels coming across the border. There are massive chemical weapons stashes throughout the Bekaa Valley there along the Litani River. Hezbollah has effectively controlled the government for some time. It is a real mess. This morning, just as I was getting ready to leave home, Syria, Israel had fired artillery into the Golan Heights because their patrols had been attacked for the second time in the last 24 hours. This is one of these flashpoints in the world where something small and minor can quickly escalate. Trust me that if Israel thinks that there are chemical weapons out there, they will move. Syria is an ethnic mix, as is Lebanon. You can see the different ethnic groups. The orange would be Sunnis. The kind of light red or reddish orange, I don't know whatever you would call that, would be Sunni, Shia Muslims. Yellow would be Christians. The gray area are the Druze, which is kind of an odd mix of Christianity, Islam, and some other stuff. They're very strange. And then red would be Alawites. Assad is an Alawite, and there is essentially, by most estimates, by people who really understand the situation, there is a war going on throughout the Middle East between Sunni and Shia Muslims right now. Who's going to come out on top and who's going to control? They're united in some things, but they're fighting to be the top dog. Iran would be Shia. Syria is a mix. Actually, Iran is mostly Shia. Shia majority in Iraq, where Shia is in control, but there's a large Sunni minority and they're bombing each other daily. You can read about that on the news. This is a Muslim cleric who was killed, and his son who was killed while worshiping in a mosque on Friday. That's their funeral. Yesterday, we see this headline, that Islamic law is now finding its way into Syria, if that's a surprise. The other big issue is Damascus. We know that Isaiah 17 says that there's a prophecy that Damascus will be destroyed. You should also know that there are other passages that talk about the destruction of Damascus, specifically Jeremiah chapter 49. Now, I have it on pretty good authority, sources that I trust. I won't identify them, so don't ask. That when Saddam Hussein was falling, he moved his chemical weapons into Syria. There were pictures and photographs taken of those, and Israel helped take those pictures. They are aware of it, and our government telling us that there are none is not the truth. They were moved into Syria. A large number of them have made their way into the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, which is effectively controlled by Syria, or was, probably now controlled by who knows what warlord. And if you think Assad is still the head of Syria, people say you should stop looking at him as the head of Syria and just consider him to be the biggest, most powerful warlord in Syria, of which there are many. But a large number of those weapons were buried in bunkers and a ring around the city of Damascus. The city of Damascus is the oldest continuously occupied city on planet Earth. Its history goes back in a straight line over 4,000 years. It's never been destroyed. As Isaiah 17 says, it will cease from being a city. But consider that if these chemical weapons are in a ring around Damascus, look at what it says in Jeremiah chapter 24. Concerning Damascus, verse 23, Hamath and Arpad are put to shame, for they have heard bad news. They are disheartened. There is anxiety by the sea. It cannot be calm. Damascus has become helpless. She has turned away to flee, and panic has gripped her. Distress and pangs have taken hold of her like a woman in childbirth. How the city of praise has not been deserted, the town of my joy. Verse 26, therefore her young men will fall in her streets, and all the men of war will be silenced in that day, declares the Lord of hosts. I will set fire to the wall of Damascus, and it will devour the fortified towers of Ben-Hadad. That was the leader of that area at that time. I'm telling you that I can think of no time in history that those prophecies concerning Damascus are on the cusp of possibly being, or probably being fulfilled. I spent some time with Bill Salas when we were in California, and we talked a lot about Damascus and what was going on there, and he has incredible insight. I have some clips of his. I'm not going to have time to play them today, but you really should get his new book on Psalm 83. Also his videos. You can get the whole package for about $30, $35. I think it's a good investment. Pass it on to other people. You get the Kindle version for $10 of the book. So I think it's well worth the read. It's incredible insight. And having spent the better part of 2 or 3 days with him, I can tell you that he really knows the scripture. It is very instructive to sit with someone like that for an extended period of time. It's an incredible experience. So, but is this going to happen this week? Maybe. Might be a couple months. But Israel's ready. Israel's ready. And they will not hesitate if chemical weapons are confirmed to have been used. That is a red line for them. Now, supposedly it's a red line for our government, but I'm not confident that our government won't, move the red line, as they seem to be doing. Economic crisis in Egypt. They are on the verge of famine. They import over half of their food. And worldwide, Pam was just telling me that she's read some articles this week about The bee population falling around the world, having trouble pollinating crops. We have droughts in a lot of major food-producing areas. The United States really is the breadbasket of the world. And we may not have food to export. And Russia didn't have food to export last year. And Egypt is really in the point of a major crisis, which kind of brings into play the prophecies of Isaiah 19 about everyone being against his brother in that area. Interesting article in the Atlantic this week was King Hussein of Jordan, or King Abdul, I'm sorry, King Hussein's son. And this was just Jeffrey Goldberg writing. Abdul is wary of Erdogan, the Turkish prime minister, whose Justice and Development Party he believes, merely promoting a softer-edge version of Islamism. Erdogan once said that democracy for him is a bus ride. Once I get to my stop, I'm getting off. He sees Erdogan as a more restrained and more savvy version of Mohammed Morsi, who set back Muslim Brotherhood's cause in Egypt by making a premature play for absolute power. Instead of the Turkish model taking 6 or 7 years, being an Erdogan, Morsi wanted to do it overnight, the king said.
That's the Obama model, too.
What's that?
That's the Obama model as well.
I think that's right. I actually wrote that in an article for Bill Koenig about 1.5 years ago, that the Egyptian would operate on a much faster track than the Turkish model did for the Islamists taking power. This is a report that was issued by the women of Egypt to the Council on Women's Rights at the UN, from the Arab Republic of Egypt. Listen to what they say in here. This is one of their statements. Now, this is where they're enacting Sharia law. Now, we know that Sharia law doesn't really recognize that much about the rights of women, but this is a quote taken directly from the report, just submitted a week or so ago. Egypt attaches great importance to alleviating the growing suffering faced by women in the Arab region, especially by Palestinian and Syrian women. We call on the international community to provide all forms of support to women under occupation and in conflict situations. In reference to the report of the Secretary General on the situation of Palestinian women and the possibility of assisting them in areas of health and education, we once again urge the international community to support the Palestinian women's rights to a decent life. Coming out of that, Anna Bayevsky, writing in I think this is a new Al-Jamainer. It's a sort of a collection of Jewish news and information. Wrote this article a week ago, Turning Human Rights into a Weapon Against Israel. This is what she says. Next week, the UN top human rights body, the Human Rights Council, will end its session by adopting 6 resolutions condemning human rights violations by one state alone, Israel, and 1 resolution each on human rights violations in 7 of the other 192 UN countries combined. In Syria, reports suggest that there are more than 90,000 dead, 2.5 million internally displaced, and that's like over the city, more than the population of Columbus and its suburbs, and 750,000 refugees. Syrian refugees have even fled to Israel through the Golan Heights, where they have received life-saving medical care. And then it concludes, and yet the Human Rights Council has just circulated a resolution called Human Rights in the Occupied Syrian Golan. So you see that even though this is happening in Syria, it has nothing to do with Israel. Israel's being blamed because it's the Syrian-occupied Golan, and everybody knows who's occupying this. Caroline Glick, just briefly writing in advance of President Obama's visit to Israel this week, said, why is he going? I mean, what's he doing? She said this, I like her, I think she writes with clarity. The only revealing aspect of Obama's itinerary is his decision to, on the one hand, bypass Israel's elected representatives by spurning the invitation to speak before the Knesset, and on the other hand, to address a hand-picked audience of university students, an audience grossly overpopulated by unelectable radical leftists. In the past, U.S. presidents have spoken before audiences of Israeli leftists in order to elevate and empower the political left against the right. But this is the first time that a U.S. president has spurred not only the elected right, but elected leftist politicians as well, as by failing to speak to the Knesset while actively courting the unelectable radical left through his talk to a university audience. So what does Obama hope to achieve with this novel practice? Clearly is not attempting to use the opportunity of his addressing this audience to express contrition for his first term's policies. In his interview with Channel 2, Obama spoke of the instability on Israel's borders, but never mentioned the key role he played in overthrowing Mubarak and empowering the Muslim Brotherhood, thus emptying of meaning Israel's peace treaty with the most populous Arab state. He never mentioned that his feckless handling of Syria's civil war ensured that the moderate opposition forces would be eclipsed by radical Islamists affiliated with al-Qaeda, as has happened. Al-Qaeda forces are now being deployed along Syria's border with Israel, and that there is a real and rising danger that Syria's arsenals of chemical and biological weapons, as well as its ballistic missiles, will fall into their hands. So since he doesn't think he's done anything wrong, and he intends to continue with the same policy in his second term, why did he decide to come to Israel? And why is he addressing it so, seeking to empower the radical, unelectable left? Obama's speech in Cairo to the Muslim world was held at the Islamist Al-Azhar University. By speaking at Al-Azhar, Obama weakened Mubarak in three different ways. First, Al-Azhar's faculty members regularly issue religious rulings calling for the murder of non-Muslims, prohibiting the practice of Judaism, and facilitating the victimization of women. Tell that to the UN. In stating these views, Al-Azhar's leadership has demonstrated that their worldview and values are far less amenable to the American strategic interest and moral values than Mubarak's worldview was. By speaking at Al-Azhar, Obama signaled that he would reward the anti-American Islamists at the expense of the pro-American Arab nationalists. Second, in contempt of Mubarak's explicit wishes, Obama insisted on inviting members of the Muslim Brotherhood to attend his speech. In acting as he did, Obama signaled that under his leadership, the U.S. was abandoning its support for Mubarak and transferring its sympathies to the Muslim Brotherhood. So, bottom line is, we have a problem. So Obama went to Israel this week. He laid a wreath at the grave of Herzl. He stood at the overlook as you exit out of the Yad Vashem, that a very powerful moment as you walk out of this memorial to the slaughter of Jews and the Holocaust in Europe, and you walk up a ramp and overlook the city of Jerusalem and have this beautiful vista of the city of Jerusalem. It's an incredibly emotional moment if you understand what that museum really represents. So where does Obama get all this stuff? Well, how many of you heard of this guy, Ben Rhodes? He is Obama's primary advisor on international affairs. In fact, he's now 35, but back in 2009, at the age of 31, he is the one who wrote Obama's Cairo speech. He grew up, his father was a conservative Episcopalian, and his mother was a left-wing Jew. And they said they didn't agree on anything in that house. The mother, Ben Rhodes and his mother rooted for the Yankees, or for the Mets, and his brother and father rooted for the Yankees. His brother, by the way, is president of CBS News. You're closing the circle just a little bit. Here's just a short, this is about a 30-second clip of an interview with him about what happened in Israel this week.
He gave a speech at the Jerusalem Convention Center to the Israeli people, particularly young people. We were really inspired by the overwhelmingly positive response from the young people in attendance at the speech. I think that, again, the President was able to speak to the deep connections between our two countries, the deep respect we have for Israel, and our shared commitment to pursuing peace here in the Middle East.
Now, by the way, of course you're going to get, if you handpick an audience, you're going to get an enthusiastic response. But even conservative Jewish commentators and that type of thing that I've read have called it the most Zionist speech of any president ever. And I think you really should go read it, but you need to read the first part with the last part. But again, this follows up the speech at Al-Azhar in 2009, and this is what one headline says: Obama stirs young Israelis with the passionate speech of a left-wing Zionist. Here's just a couple of clips from that speech.
Thank you. Shalom. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Everybody, please have a seat. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it is a great honor to be with you here in Jerusalem, and I'm so grateful for the welcome that I've received from the people of Israel. Thank you. I bring with me the support of the American people and the friendship that binds us together. You know, over the last 2 days, I've reaffirmed the bonds between our countries with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Perez. I've borne witness to the ancient history of the Jewish people at the Shrine of the Book, and I've seen Israel's shining future in your scientists and your entrepreneurs. This is a nation of museums and patents, timeless holy sites, groundbreaking innovation. Only in Israel could you see the Dead Sea Scrolls and the place where the technology on board the Mars rover originated at the same time. It is not fair that a Palestinian child cannot grow up in a state of their own. Living their entire lives with the presence of a foreign army that controls the movements, not just of those young people, but their parents, their grandparents, every single day. It's not just when settler violence against Palestinians goes unpunished. It's not right to prevent Palestinians from farming their lands or restricting a student's ability to move around the West Bank or displace Palestinian families from their homes. Neither occupation nor expulsion is the answer. Just as Israelis built a state in their homeland, Palestinians have a right to be a free people in their own land. You know, I'm going off script here for a second, but
he goes on to tell a story, and here's his conclusion.
Here, in this small strip of land that has been the center of so much of the world's history, so much triumph and so much tragedy, Israelis have built something that few could have imagined 65 years ago. Tomorrow I will pay tribute to that history. At the grave of Herzl, a man who had the foresight to see the future of the Jewish people had to be reconnected to their past. At the grave of Rabin, who understood that Israel's victories in war had to be followed by the battles for peace. At Yad Vashem, where the world is reminded of the cloud of evil that can descend on the Jewish people and all of humanity if we ever fail to be vigilant. We bear all that history on our shoulders. We carry all that history in our hearts. Today, as we face the twilight of Israel's founding generation, you, the young people of Israel, must now claim its future. It falls to you to write the next chapter in the great story of this great nation. and as the president of a country that you can count on as your greatest friend, I am confident that you can help us find the promise in the days that lie ahead. And as a man who's been inspired in my own life by that timeless calling within the Jewish experience, Tikkun Olam, I am hopeful that we can draw upon what's best in ourselves to meet the challenges that will come, to win the battles for peace in the wake of so much war, and to do the work of repairing this world. That's your job. That's my job. That's the task of all of us. May God bless you. May God bless Israel. May God bless the United States of America. Toda Rabba. Thank you.
Jeffrey Goldberg writing said the speech was overall quite eloquent and strong and very moving from the Jewish perspective. There were bits that were too naive for me, but more on that later. This is the setting, though, that made it brilliant, standing ovations from young Israelis for an endorsement of a Palestinian state by an enthusiastically Zionist African-American president whose middle name is Hussein. How exactly did he pull that one off? This ought to be a wake-up call for everybody. There is coming a man who will exceed the events that are staged by our president, and will deceive the Jewish people into a peace. And so I will just leave with this today, that if you're here and you've never put your faith in Jesus Christ for your sins so that you can stand someday before a holy God and be judged through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ and not your own good works, then you need to make sure that you take care of that immediately, because time is running out and you may not have any other chance. Jude says, speaking of some people, you have to snatch them as if out of the fire, and that may be the way we ought to react to our unsaved friends, relatives, and others. And if you're a Christian, you ought to look at this and say, Jesus could be here very, very soon, and how am I living my life, and do I want to stand before my King with confidence or with shame in how I've been living my life as a Christian? Because the second coming and the events of the end times, I think, are upon us, and it's time to wake up and take a stand, because Jesus is coming. That's all I have for today.